Hi, welcome back to the second part of the tutorial. In this section, we'll continue by adding secondary details and building more complexity into the design. If you haven't watched the first part yet, we recommend checking it out before continuing. And if you're enjoying the content, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Let's get started. We'll begin by duplicating the outer radial rectangles element. Under the node parameters, let's set both the width and length to 0.01. Then, under the radial parameters, we'll adjust the radius until the elements sit comfortably inside the smaller inner ring. From there, we'll increase the number of elements to 64. Under the offset parameters, we'll set x, y, z to 1 and adjust the seed until we get a distribution that works well. After that, we can reduce both the width and length to 0.005 and fine-tune the seed once more if needed. Next, we'll duplicate this element and create a different variation. Let's reduce the number of elements to 16, reset the seed to 0, and bring the XYZ offset back to 0. We'll disable centered along X, set the Z rotation offset to 180 degrees, and reduce the radius until the elements align with the inner ring. To finish this variation, we'll set the width to 0.003 and the length to 0.001. Now let's duplicate the markers and reduce the number of elements to 2. Then we'll adjust the radius until both markers sit in the right position. Using the start angle, we'll align the first line with the lower right arc, and then use the overall angle parameter to bring the second line into position on the opposite side. Once they're aligned, we can increase the width to around 0.3. From here, we'll duplicate the lines again, reduce the number of elements to 1, and set the start angle to 90 degrees, so the new line sits at the top of the composition. Next, we'll duplicate one of the existing arcs, reduce its radius slightly, set the start angle to 135 degrees, and bring the arc angle down to around 70 degrees. Now we can duplicate the top line and use it to create a series of smaller radial segments. We'll set the number of elements to 26 and temporarily use an angle of around 30 degrees. Then we'll adjust the start angle until the group is positioned correctly. Once the placement feels right, we can fine-tune the overall angle so the lines stop just before the main line. We'll adjust the radius to refine their position, reduce the width to around 0.006. We'll duplicate this element once more, reduce its radius slightly, and increase the width by a small amount. Next, we'll duplicate one of the radial arcs. We can use the start angle to position it and the angle parameter to control how far it extends around the circle. Once we're happy with that placement, we'll duplicate it again, increase the radius, and reduce the width slightly. We'll make one final duplicate of this arc, increasing the start angle and adjusting the width to create another variation. Now let's work with the thicker lower arcs. We'll duplicate it and reduce the number of elements to 1. Then we'll set the arc angle to 10 degrees and the start angle to -90 degrees. We'll reduce the radius slightly, set the outer thickness to 0, and increase the inner thickness to create a stronger shape. From here, we can duplicate the element, reposition it using the start angle, increase the thickness slightly, and reduce the arc angle by a small amount. Using this same approach, we can create additional variations and distribute them across the left side of the composition to balance the design. Next, we'll return to the inner markers and duplicate them. We'll temporarily increase the radius, then set the width to 0.003 and the length to 0.2. We'll reduce the number of elements to 1 and increase the number of rings to 10. Then we'll bring the ring spacing down to 0.005 and use the start angle to position the structure. To make this element less uniform, we'll move into the HUD parameters and change the type to percentage. Let's increase the percentage to around 60 and adjust the seed until we get an interesting distribution of visible elements. Using the same technique, we can duplicate this structure several times, change the seed values, and position the variations around the composition wherever we need additional detail. And that brings us to the end of this part. We've added another level of complexity to the design, using radial rectangles, arcs, markers, repeated structures, and randomized visibility. In the next tutorial, we'll continue developing the secondary details and refining the composition. If you found this tutorial helpful, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.